guys. So this training is on data collection. So with this one, I am not going to get into too much detail because I feel like if I were to do that, it'd be pretty overwhelming. So I just kind of want to hit on a couple of different types of data collection that may be requested of you at some point to kind of help me make decisions for things that you're doing at home. So we take data on everything. You may have seen our techs walking around with their little clipboards and looking down and writing stuff down. And that's because in the field of ABA, data is so important. The reason being is it helps us, drive our decisions and understand whether or not something is truly an acquired skill. So in teaching, we have them take data on the skills that we're teaching. And in a previous training, we talked about mastery criteria and what that is. But it helps us truly understand whether or not a child has a skill. So in teaching, typically the standard is we try to implement several trials of the same thing and work on fading out our prompts and taking data on each of those. And then when a child performs at 80% accuracy for 2 days in a row or 3 days in a row in some cases, then we count that skill as mastered and we move on to something else. However, if it was just kind of, oh yeah, I think they have it, that doesn't really tell us, and it's not quote unquote evidence-based because we don't have it in writing, basically. And to me, that leaves it for a lot of room for human error because it's so subjective. Where with taking data and actually being able to look at it and analyze it kind of gives us a better idea of true mastery, and it's really concrete and there's not room for discretion, is really what I'm getting at. But it also helps, in the realm of, when we're teaching new skills, it helps me understand whether or not we need to change something. So, one of the big focuses of my job as a BCBA is looking at data and analyzing it and determining next steps. So, when I'm doing a supervision session, one of the first things I do is look at the binder and look at the last week's data sheets. And I do that because I'm looking at, okay, this touching nose has been in for 2 weeks now and they're not getting it. What do we need to be doing differently? And that's something that I focus my sessions on, is how to continue to make sure that we're seeing progress in our sessions. Or, every time you do it on the first time, this kid gets it and they know it, then I really think this skill is mastered, and we do some testing to ensure whether or not this skill is mastered. So data tells me a lot about, what's going on during the sessions. So in terms of what that looks like for teaching, I kind of talked a little bit about getting learning trials. Our tech's main focus is to focus on specific targets. So examples of what that would look like are, maybe we're teaching a child to identify their nose and their head. Those two targets would be listed on the child's data sheet. So that way the tech knows, okay, I'm going to do this skill 10 times today and work on fading my prompts each time. So they're going to take data on every single time that they do one of those things. So if I say touch nose, but I had to point to my nose or point to their nose, then they would record the prompt level. So then that way I can look at it and okay, you faded this week from a physical prompt to a gestural prompt. So we're at least moving in the right direction. And if they are getting it independently, they record that as a plus. So to just kind of give you an overview of what that looks like, if they did it 10 times on a given day and they had to point to their nose 3 times, that's 3 gestural prompts that would be recorded. And then the other 7 times they did it, the child got it independent, and they recorded those as pluses. We would calculate the percentage of that. So 7 independents out of 10 total trials would be equivalent to 70%. So that tells me that they are 70% independent in the skill, where we shoot for 80%, which that's varied depending on the child, but for the most part the standard is 80%, because that's shows us that they're pretty consistent with it, but it also allows room for human error. Nobody's expected to get 100% on everything all the time, so we don't want to set the bar too high to make it unrealistic for kids either. So that percentage kind of tells me, like, okay, we're going to work on it for another day now. So then the next day they're working on touch nose again. And then, maybe today they got 80%. So that being said, that's day 1 of mastery. And then we would look to get another 80% day, or even just a next day test and check to make sure that they still have the skill. So that's kind of in a nutshell what our data collection entails for the clinic. What that means for you, we would never have you, probably not have you take trial by trial data on every single thing that your child's doing, because A, I know it's not realistic, and B, if we're teaching in the clinic, really the things that we would probably want you to be testing at home are the generalization pieces. So another type of data collection that we do is called probe data, and this is something that may be pertinent to you at home. So we may say, Susie has mastered all of her targets for body parts. Can you try at home and see if she's doing it at home? So probably what we would have you do is jot down, all right, I tried having her touch her nose, her head, her tummy, and her knees. And either she got them or she didn't. So we would probably, like with probe data, we're just recording plus or minus. So plus means yes, she got it and it was independent. Minus means no, she didn't do it. And then 2, that kind of just gives us a guideline of whether or not we have to teach this skill. So if Susie is getting it really consistently for us in the clinic, but is just not doing it at home, that tells us we need to teach generalization. And we do a probe before we teach any new skill, just to see if the child has it already in their repertoire or not. And we also do it if somebody is, I'm just noticing, we probed matching before we taught it and they didn't get it. Now we started teaching it. Now they understand what we're asking and they're just getting it and we're flying through targets. Then typically we would just do a probe and probe several different targets to see whether or not the child has the skill. So a probe versus the actual teaching data collection is really just, like I said, like a test to see whether or not the child has the skill or not. And that just tells me whether or not we need to teach the skill. So like I said, I think that one would be the most pertinent for you guys to teach it or to utilize at home if you did have to utilize data collection. The other thing that I think is probably going to be relevant at some point, especially if your child engages in challenging behaviors at home, is ABC data collection. So again, we talked about antecedents, consequences, functions of behaviors in all separate trainings. So I would really strongly encourage you, if I've requested that you take data at home, to watch those videos, because that kind of gives a better understanding. But basically, the purpose of ABC data, and ABC stands for antecedent behavior consequence. The purpose of it is, again, for me to better understand why the behavior is occurring. So we utilize this as kind of like a baseline measure of how frequently it's happening, what conditions and scenarios is it happening to it, what are the current consequences that are being delivered, and that helps me drive my behavior plan. It's tough because, as parents and you're seeing your child struggling, you want a quick, immediate fix. And I wish I could provide that to you, but I can't because I don't have any information on what's happening. So likely what I would request is that you take some type of log of ABC data for me so I can get a snapshot of what's happening. So say your child is aggressing towards their siblings. What I would do is specifically define the behavior. So in this scenario, it's, child hits brother in the head. That's the behavior that we're looking to decrease. Then I would have you probably track for a solid week, if that's feasible, of data every single instance that it happens. So you would utilize what we call an ABC data sheet. It has like an A section where you would record the antecedents. So what were all the triggers to the behavior? Did the sibling do anything? Where were you located? Who was present? Were there any other variables that happened directly before the aggressive moment occurred? And then the behavior would be exactly what happened. So Avery hit Max on the head 3 times. And then the consequence is exactly what you did and said, contingent on that behavior happening. So Avery was removed and was in her room in a timeout for 5 minutes. So that information helps me determine what's going on and, some background information about the behavior. And then there's also a section for duration, so how long it happened. And then I would have you do that every single instance that it occurred. So if it's happening 13 times a day, then each separate behavior should have its own ABC section filled out. So then I can see, every single time, is it because the sibling takes a toy, or is it sometimes because the sibling's just next to them, or is it, is the sometimes they seeking the sibling out just because they're in the room with them. So I want to see if it's a consistent antecedent, if the consequences are consistent, how many times a day it's happening, is every scenario the same, is every scenario different. So again, this kind of helps me drive decisions with what a behavior plan should look like, and the data collection is so important for me. Like I said before, it just kind of helps make me choose a behavior plan that's effective. Because it's work that you would have to put in to take data for however long I'm requesting. But then too, we can ensure that the behavior plan's right the first time. So that being said, I just wanted to provide a quick example of, if you tell me that, your sibling's aggressing towards the other sibling, that tells me, yes, this is happening, but it doesn't tell me the frequency or function or anything like that. So, back to our functions of behavior training, if your child is hitting the sibling every time mom's in the other room and mom comes running in, but I provide a behavior plan based on an escape function, then our plan's not going to work because I have the wrong function. So just the more information, the better, and the most accurate information, the better. I know personally that it's like, oh, I really do that. Like, we all have our moments that like, we yelled and we know that we probably shouldn't have yelled. That's okay. I know we're human and it happens, and it's nothing to be embarrassed about. I've seen it all. And the purpose of it, like I said, is really to help drive my decisions. And in knowing, what your instincts are, that helps me also better identify what a good behavior plan would be. Because in another training, we talk about extinction, and that, for an attention-seeking behavior, standard and best practice is to just like straight ignore an attention seeking behavior. And like, as a parent, like I am not the type of parent that can straight ignore anything, especially if it's something that drives me nuts. So in knowing that about me, I'm never going to implement a plan that requires me to do that, because I know I wouldn't be successful. So there, in the field of behavior analysis, there's not an end all be all, only one solid intervention that works. There's options, and the options are really driven based on the information that I have. So the data collection that I have is that much more valuable in determining that information. So one other thing that I wanted to touch on, I talked about regular data collection, probe data, and ABC data. I just wanted to mention two terms that you might hear from me. One is frequency. So we often, especially when talking about challenging behaviors or a number of requests, you might hear the term frequency. That means how often something is happening. So if we're looking at your child hits their siblings, we might count how many times they do that a day, and that gives us a frequency count. And we do that, like I said, because it helps us drive our decisions. So another measure that we utilize is duration. And this is looking at the total amount of time that it happens. So this is commonly used for like tantrum behavior. So we would often have you track the time it started and then the time it ended, so we can see like, all right, it lasted 45 minutes today. And just to give you kind of an idea of what I look for in those types of things are reduction in frequency and duration. So examples being, if you're taking ABC data and you're taking frequency and the number of times that your child is hitting the sibling, and on day 1, it is 35, and then on day 2 it's 30, day 3 it's 25, day 4 it's 20, day 6 it's 10, then that tells me that the behavior is on a decreasing trend, so we're not going to intervene. Whatever you're doing is working because we're seeing a decrease in the behavior, and we're seeing a decrease in the frequency. So that information is pertinent because that helps us drive our decisions. So another thing with that too is looking at maintenance or increases. So it's very easy to have a different mindset or perception of like, okay, you know what, I feel like things are going really well, or I'm handling this really well. I would highly recommend looking at data and determining whether or not that's truly the case, or am I just, feeling good these days and feeling confident about how I'm intervening. So again, it's all up to perception unless you're recording data and we can actually see the true difference in behavior change. Same goes for duration. I have a 2-year-old, so I see a lot of those tantrums. So looking at duration is important because, your child may have 25 tantrums a day. But are they decreasing in duration, or are they increasing in duration, or are they maintaining? So, we want to look at, all right, my child has 25 tantrums and they all last 15 minutes. That's probably pretty significant for you. That seems like all day. That's like several an hour. So that being said, it's pretty impactful. However, if you have 25 30-second tantrums a day, then that's probably pretty less significant and probably pretty age appropriate. Maybe we could reduce the frequency a little bit. But the duration says a lot about, again, if you see a decreased duration, but the frequency is staying the same, then whatever you're doing is still working. So those are things that we look at. We look at the trends of behavior and whether or not they're increasing or decreasing or maintaining, and then we make tweaks to the behavior plan accordingly based on the information that we have. So those are the main points of data collection that I wanted to touch on. Like I said, I would really strongly encourage reviewing the other trainings on functions of behavior and antecedents and consequences if you are taking ABC data. All right, thanks guys.